The dust hadn't even settled on her husband's grave when the banker came calling, and Sarah Brennan knew her world was about to crumble like dried earth beneath a wagon wheel. She stood on the porch of the small ranch house outside Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, watching the black carriage roll up the dirt path in the autumn of 1882. Her hands, still rough from digging Thomas's grave just 3 weeks prior, gripped the weathered wood railing until her knuckles went white. The consumption had taken him slowly, eating away at his lungs through the long summer months until he finally surrendered in September. She had nursed him through it all, watching the man she had married 5 years ago waste away to nothing but bones and fevered whispers. The banker, a portly man named Cyrus Whitfield, stepped down from the carriage with papers in hand. His face held no sympathy, only the cold calculation of numbers and debts. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, tipping his hat with mechanical politeness. "I regret calling during your time of mourning, but business cannot wait indefinitely." Sarah lifted her chin, forcing steel into her spine. At 24 years old, she had already buried a stillborn daughter, endured 3 miscarriages that left her body broken, and now stood widowed with nothing but debts and empty land stretching as far as the eye could see. "What is it you want, Mr. Whitfield?" "The mortgage payments are 3 months overdue. Your husband was granted an extension due to his illness, but now that he has passed, the bank requires either immediate payment or foreclosure." He unfolded the papers, though Sarah did not need to see them to know what they said. "How long do I have?" 30 days, Mrs. Brennan. "I am sorry, but that is the best I can offer." After he left, Sarah walked through the empty house, her footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floors. Thomas had been a dreamer, always certain that the next season would bring prosperity. But the cattle had died in the harsh winter 2 years back, and they had never recovered. The land was good for little except growing heartache. She had no family left. Her parents had died on the journey west when she was 16, victims of cholera. Her brother had headed to California years ago and never written back. She was alone in a way that made the vast Wyoming sky feel crushing rather than free. The following morning, Sarah rode into Cheyenne proper, her mare plodding along the rutted road. The town had grown considerably since the railroad came through, transforming from a collection of tents and shanties into a bustling hub of commerce and cattle. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, and the sounds of hammers and saws filled the air as construction continued on new establishments. She needed work, any kind of work that might help her scrape together enough money to save the ranch, though deep in her heart she knew it was already lost. The general store did not need help. The hotel had a full staff. The restaurants turned her away politely but firmly. By noon, discouraged and exhausted, Sarah found herself at the edge of town near the stockyards. Cowboys moved among the cattle pens, their voices carrying on the wind as they prepared herds for shipping east. She was about to turn back when she noticed a man struggling with a particularly ornery bull that had broken through a fence section. The bull was massive, a red-brown beast with horns that could gore a horse. It bellowed and pawed the ground, eyes rolling white with fury. The man, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of prairie wheat, moved with careful precision, speaking in low tones that Sarah could not quite hear. Other cowboys had gathered, ropes in hand, but the tall man waved them back. He approached the bull with nothing but his voice and steady movements, never breaking eye contact with the animal. Sarah found herself holding her breath, unable to look away. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the bull's head lowered, its breathing slowed, and the man reached out to touch its massive neck. The bull followed him docilely back toward the pen as if it had been a tame dairy cow all along. The gathered men erupted in cheers and whistles. One clapped the tall man on the back so hard he stumbled forward a step, grinning. "Luke Morgan, you got some kind of devil magic with animals," one of them shouted. Luke, as she now knew him to be called, just shook his head and grabbed his hat from where it had fallen in the dust. That was when his eyes met Sarah's across the distance. She should have looked away, should have returned to her mare and ridden home, but something in his gaze held her frozen. His eyes were the color of creek water in summer, that peculiar gray-green that changed with the light. Even from yards away, she felt the intensity of his attention like a physical touch. He walked toward her, still holding his hat, and Sarah noticed the way he moved with an easy confidence that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. He was older than her, perhaps 30 or 32, with weathered lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. "Ma'am," he said when he reached her, his voice a low rumble that sent unexpected warmth through her chest. "Can I help you with something? You look a bit lost." Sarah swallowed hard, suddenly aware of her worn calico dress and the way her dark hair had escaped its pins to curl wildly around her face. "I am looking for work," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I thought perhaps the stockyards might need someone in the offices or for cooking for the men." Luke studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a softening that made him look younger. "You are Sarah Brennan, aren't you? Thomas Brennan's wife." "I heard about his passing. I am sorry for your loss." The automatic words of sympathy spoken so many times by so many people should have meant nothing, but the way Luke said them, with genuine sorrow in his eyes, made her throat tighten. "Thank you," she managed. "The stockyards don't have work like that," he said slowly, "but I might know of something. My place is about 5 miles west of here. I run cattle, horses, and I have been needing someone to help with the house and the cooking. It is just me and my foreman, Pete, and neither of us can cook worth a damn. The work would be steady, and it comes with room and board if you need it, plus fair wages." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. Working on a ranch, living there with 2 men she did not know, would set tongues wagging all over the county. But what choice did she have? In 30 days she would have no home at all. "That is very generous," she said carefully, "but I have my own place to see to." "Could I work during the days and return home in the evenings?" Luke nodded slowly, though something in his expression suggested he knew more about her situation than he was letting on. "That would be fine, though the ride would be long." "Why don't you come see the place first? Make sure it suits you before you decide." She agreed because she had no other options, and because there was something about Luke Morgan that made her want to trust him, despite all the lessons life had taught her about trusting anyone. They rode west together, Sarah on her aging mare and Luke on a magnificent buckskin gelding that responded to the slightest pressure of his knees. He did not try to fill the silence with empty chatter, for which Sarah was grateful. The land rolled out around them in waves of brown and gold, the grasses dried from summer but still beautiful in their own austere way. The Morgan Ranch, when they reached it, took Sarah's breath away. It was not large by the standards of the cattle barons who were swallowing up the open range, but it was clearly prosperous. A sturdy 2-story house built of timber and stone sat on a slight rise, with a barn, stable, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings arranged in practical order below. Horses grazed in fenced pastures, and she could see cattle dotting the distant hills. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "Mostly," Luke said, dismounting and moving to help her down from her horse. His hands were strong and sure on her waist, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. "Started with nothing but a piece of land and a dream 7 years ago, had some help from Pete and a few other good men along the way. Inside, the house was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The main room held a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture that was practical rather than decorative, and windows that let in floods of light. The kitchen was well equipped but showed signs of neglect, dishes stacked haphazardly and dust gathering in corners. "I know it is a mess," Luke said with a self-deprecating smile. "Like I said, neither Pete nor I are much for housekeeping." Sarah found herself smiling back, the first genuine smile she had felt in weeks. "I have seen worse," she said, which was true. "When would you want me to start?" "Tomorrow, if that suits you. I will pay you $30 a month plus meals. Does that seem fair? It was more than fair. It was generous to the point of charity, and Sarah's pride bristled even as her practical mind knew she could not refuse. That is very kind, Mr. Morgan. Luke, he corrected gently. Just Luke. And it is not kindness, Mrs. Brennan. I truly need the help, and something tells me you are exactly the right person for the job. They stood in the warm kitchen, autumn sunlight streaming through the windows, and Sarah felt the strangest sensation, as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet in some fundamental way. This man, this stranger, was offering her a lifeline without asking for anything in return. It seemed too good to be true, and yet when she looked into his eyes, she saw only honest sincerity. Sarah, she said softly, you should call me Sarah. Over the following weeks, Sarah fell into a rhythm at the Morgan Ranch. She rose before dawn at her own house, tended to her few chickens and the vegetable garden she refused to let die, then rode to Luke's place as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. She cooked breakfast for Luke and Pete, a grizzled cowboy in his 50s who treated her with grandfatherly kindness. Then she spent the day cleaning, mending, cooking, and generally bringing order to the household. Luke was gone much of the time, working with the cattle or horses, but when he was near, Sarah found herself hyper-aware of his presence. The way he hummed tunelessly while fixing a broken chair, the sound of his boots on the porch, the smell of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. She told herself it was nothing, just the natural result of being around another person after so many lonely months of tending to Thomas's sick. She was a widow, still in mourning, and had no business noticing the way Luke's shoulders filled out his shirt or the rare, devastating smile that transformed his usually serious face. But her heart, traitorous thing that it was, did not listen to reason. One afternoon in late October, Sarah was beating rugs outside when she heard shouting from the direction of the horse pasture. She dropped the carpet beater and ran toward the sound, her skirts hiked up around her knees. Luke was in the corral with a young stallion, a gorgeous paint horse with a wild eye and foam flecking its mouth. The horse reared, hooves flashing dangerously close to Luke's head. Pete stood outside the fence, his face tight with worry. "Get out of there, Luke," Pete called. "That horse is not ready. He is too wild yet." But Luke moved with the same calm assurance Sarah had seen with the bull, speaking in those low tones, never showing fear even when the stallion charged at him. He sidestepped at the last moment, his hand reaching out to brush the horse's neck as it passed. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. One wrong move and Luke would be trampled or kicked, his skull crushed or his ribs shattered. She gripped the fence rail so hard she felt splinters dig into her palms. The dance continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Slowly, incrementally, the stallion calmed. Its ears, which had been pinned flat against its head, began to swivel forward. Its breathing slowed. And finally, miraculously, it stood still and let Luke approach. Let him run his hands over its trembling body, let him loop a rope around its neck. When Luke finally led the stallion from the corral, his shirt was dark with sweat and there was a wild, exhilarated light in his eyes. He saw Sarah standing there and his expression shifted into something softer. "Sorry if that frightened you," he said. "Probably should have warned you that we are breaking horses this week." "You could have been killed," Sarah said, and was horrified to hear her voice shake. Luke studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "Would that have mattered to you?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, and finally said, "Of course it would matter. You have been very kind to me." Something flickered in Luke's eyes, disappointment perhaps, but he just nodded and led the stallion away to the barn. That night, as Sarah rode home under a sky thick with stars, she let herself admit the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Luke Morgan, and it was the worst possible thing that could happen. She was damaged goods, a widow who could not even fulfill the most basic expectation of a wife. The stillbirth and miscarriages had left scars inside her that the doctor in Cheyenne said would likely prevent her from ever carrying a child to term. Thomas had tried to be understanding, but she had seen the disappointment in his eyes, the way he pulled away from her over the years until they were more like strangers sharing a house than husband and wife. No man would want her, not really, not once he knew the truth. And Luke Morgan deserved better than a barren woman who would bring him nothing but an empty nursery and dashed hopes. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the ranch determined to maintain proper distance. She would be polite but professional, nothing more. This resolution lasted until she entered the kitchen and found Luke attempting to cook breakfast with disastrous results. Smoke poured from the stove, eggs were burned to a crisp in the pan, and flour dusted every surface like snow. "I thought I would surprise you," Luke said sheepishly, waving a towel at the smoke. "Let you sleep in a bit." Despite her determination to remain aloof, Sarah burst out laughing. It felt good, that laughter, like something rusty inside her chest, was finally loosening. "Get out of my kitchen," she said, shooing him toward the door, "before you burn the whole house down." Luke went willingly, but not before catching her hand for just a moment. His palm was warm and calloused, his fingers strong. "I like hearing you laugh," he said simply, then released her and disappeared outside. Sarah stood frozen, her hand still tingling from his touch, and knew her resolution had already failed. November brought the first serious snow, a blizzard that swept down from the mountains and buried the land under 2 feet of white. Sarah had stayed at her own ranch the night before, and when she woke to find herself snowed in, her first thought was not worry for herself, but concern that Luke and Pete would have no breakfast, no warm meal after working in the bitter cold. She spent the day pacing her small house like a caged animal, irrational anxiety gnawing at her. By the second day, when the snow showed no signs of stopping, she was seriously considering trying to make the journey on foot. Which was why, when she heard the sound of a horse outside her door that afternoon, she flung it open with her heart in her throat. Luke sat astride his buckskin, both of them covered in snow, his face ruddy with cold. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said, his breath pluming in the frozen air. "You rode 5 miles in this?" Sarah asked incredulously. "You could have gotten lost, frozen to death." "I know the way blindfolded," Luke said, dismounting stiffly, "and I had to know you were safe." Sarah ushered him inside, scolding him even as she felt warmth spread through her chest at his concern. She made him coffee and insisted he sit by the fire to warm up. Her small house felt even smaller with Luke in it, his presence filling the space in a way Thomas never had. "You cannot ride back tonight," she said firmly. "It will be dark soon and the temperature is already dropping. You will stay here." Luke looked like he wanted to argue, probably worried about propriety, but practicality won out. "I will sleep by the fire," he said. "I have my bedroll." They ate a simple dinner of salt pork and beans, the storm howling outside the thin walls. Sarah was acutely aware that they were alone, truly alone, perhaps for the first time. At the ranch, Pete was always somewhere nearby. But here, in her small house with the snow cutting them off from the world, there were no buffers. "Tell me about yourself," Luke said as they sat by the fire after dinner. "I feel like I know almost nothing about you except that you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted and you are far too brave for your own good." "Brave?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "I am not brave, I am just trying to survive." "Same thing sometimes," Luke said quietly. "Where are you from originally?" So Sarah told him, the words coming easier than she expected. She told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, her father's decision to head west for opportunities, the cholera outbreak on the trail that took both her parents within days of each other. She told him about meeting Thomas in a Denver boarding house, how he had seemed kind and stable, how marriage had felt like the only safe option for a girl of 18 with no family and no prospects. "Did you love him?" Luke asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity. Sarah considered the question honestly. I thought I did at first, or maybe I just loved the idea of not being alone. He was a good man, Thomas. He did not deserve what happened to him. And what about you? Luke asked. Did you deserve what happened to you? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that, had ever considered that she might have suffered too. I did not think about it in those terms, she said slowly. Maybe you should, Luke said, his gray-green eyes reflecting the firelight. From what I have heard, you spent 5 years working yourself to the bone on a ranch that was failing, nursing a sick husband, dealing with losses that would break most people. And here you are, still standing, still fighting. That is the definition of brave, Sarah. Tears burned behind her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back fiercely. Why are you being so kind to me? Luke was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if he was testing each word before releasing it. Because from the moment I saw you at the stockyards, looking lost and determined and beautiful, I have not been able to get you out of my mind. Because every morning I wake up looking forward to seeing you. Because you have brought life back to my house, and I think maybe to me too. Because I am falling in love with you, Sarah Brennan, and I needed you to know that, even if you cannot feel the same way. The world seemed to stop spinning. Sarah could hear nothing but the crackling of the fire and the pounding of her own heart. She should tell him he was being foolish, that she was not worth loving. She should maintain the distance she had promised herself to keep. Instead, she whispered, I do feel the same way, and that terrifies me. Luke moved then, crossing the small space between them to kneel in front of her chair. He took her hands in his, and Sarah felt the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. Why does it terrify you? This was the moment. The moment where she had to tell him the truth and watch whatever was growing between them wither and die. Sarah felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step off into nothing. Because I cannot give you what you deserve, she said, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. I cannot give you children, Luke. I am barren. My body is broken in ways that cannot be fixed. The doctor said after the last miscarriage that it would be dangerous for me to even try again. So you see, you should not waste your feelings on me. You should find a woman who can give you sons to help work the ranch, daughters to fill your house with laughter. I can give you none of that. She tried to pull her hands away, but Luke held them fast. When she finally found the courage to look at his face, she saw no disappointment, no regret, only a fierce tenderness that made her breath catch. Sarah, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. Do you really think that is all I want? Children? I am not saying I would not welcome them if they came, but that is not why I love you. I love you for your strength, your kindness, the way you hum while you work, the way you sneak extra food to Pete because you think he is too thin. I love the woman you are, not some hypothetical children you might give me. But every man wants a family, Sarah protested weakly. Then we will make a family, Luke said simply. There are plenty of children in this world who need homes. Orphans from the Indian Wars, kids whose parents died on the trail west, children born to women who cannot keep them. We can fill our home with love, Sarah, even if that love does not come from your womb. If you will have me, if you will let yourself love me, we will build something beautiful together. I promise you that. Sarah stared at him, this incredible man who was offering her everything she thought she could never have. You really mean that, she said wonderingly. You truly would not mind. I mean every word, Luke said. Marry me, Sarah. Be my wife, my partner, my love. We will figure out the rest together. She should have hesitated, should have taken time to think it through rationally. But Sarah had been rational her whole life, making safe choices that had brought her nothing but pain. For once, she wanted to choose with her heart. Yes, she said, and then more strongly, yes, I will marry you. Luke's face transformed with joy. He pulled her down from the chair and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and Sarah clung to him just as fiercely. When he finally loosened his grip enough to look at her, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. I am going to make you so happy, he promised. You already have, she said, And then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deeper, and Sarah felt like she was finally home. The storm raged for 3 more days, trapping them in the small house together. They talked endlessly, learning each other's stories, hopes, and dreams. Luke told her about growing up in Texas, losing his parents to a Comanche raid when he was 15, working as a ranch hand for years before saving enough to buy his own land. He told her about the loneliness of building the ranch alone, the nights when he wondered if he would ever find someone to share it with. Sarah told him about her first pregnancy, the joy she had felt followed by the crushing grief when her daughter was born too early and lived only an hour. She told him about the miscarriages that followed, each one stealing a piece of her hope until she had believed herself incapable of being loved. "You are so loved," Luke murmured, holding her close. "More than you know." When the storm finally broke, they rode back to Luke's ranch together. Pete took one look at their faces and grinned knowingly, but he was gentleman enough not to say anything beyond. About time. They married a week later in a simple ceremony in Cheyenne, with Pete as their witness and the circuit preacher presiding. Sarah wore her best dress, dark blue calico with tiny flowers, and Luke wore a new shirt he had bought special for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Luke kissed her in front of God and everyone, and Sarah felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. The banker, Cyrus Whitfield, attended the wedding, which surprised Sarah until she realized Luke had invited him. After the ceremony, Luke pulled the banker aside, and Sarah watched as money changed hands and papers were signed. When Luke returned to her, he pressed the deed to her old ranch into her hands. "I paid off the mortgage," he said quietly. "The land is yours, free and clear. You can sell it, keep it, do whatever you want with it. I just did not want you to lose it." Sarah stared at the papers, then at her new husband, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Why would you do this?" "Because it matters to you," Luke said simply. "Because I could, and because I want you to always know that you have choices. You did not marry me out of desperation, Sarah. You married me because you wanted to, and I needed you to know the difference." She kissed him there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw, and heard Pete chuckle and say something about young love. They held a small celebration at the ranch that evening. Pete had decorated the house with what few decorations he could find, and several neighboring ranchers stopped by with congratulations and gifts. Sarah met Luke's friends and found herself welcomed into a community she had always felt outside of as Thomas's wife. As night fell and the guests departed, Luke led Sarah upstairs to the bedroom they would now share. He had spent the week preparing it, bringing in new furniture and rugs, making it a space that felt like theirs rather than just his. "I want you to be happy here," he said, standing in the doorway as if nervous about entering his own bedroom. Sarah took his hand and pulled him inside. "I am happy anywhere you are," she said honestly. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Luke taking his time to learn her body as if it was something precious and rare. Sarah, who had only known marital relations as a duty with Thomas, discovered that it could be something entirely different. Luke worshipped her with his hands and mouth, murmuring words of love and desire that made her blush and ache in equal measure. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Sarah's head on Luke's chest, listening to the steady thud of his heartbeat. "I did not know it could be like this," she admitted quietly. Luke's arms tightened around her. "Neither did I," he said. "I think maybe it is only like this when you truly love someone." Sarah fell asleep feeling safer and more cherished than she had in her entire life. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery. Sarah moved fully into the ranch, bringing her few possessions and selling the old place to a young couple just starting out. She threw herself into making the house a real home, adding curtains and tablecloths, planting a winter garden, and generally bringing feminine touches to the masculine space. Luke was an attentive husband, always finding small ways to show his love. He brought her wildflowers he found while checking fence lines. He carved her a beautiful jewelry box from cedar wood. He made sure she had a comfortable chair by the fire, and insisted she rest in the afternoons when she looked tired. In turn, Sarah made sure he had warm meals, clean clothes, and a peaceful home to return to after long days of hard work. But more than that, she gave him her heart fully and without reservation for the first time in her life. Their physical relationship deepened and grew more passionate as Sarah became comfortable expressing her own desires. Luke delighted in discovering what pleased her, and she learned the power she had to drive him wild with want. Their bedroom became a sanctuary where the hard realities of frontier life fell away and only their love remained. But beneath the joy, Sarah harbored a growing worry. Luke said he did not mind about children, but what about when years passed and the house remained empty of young voices? What about when his friends' ranches filled with sons and daughters and his did not? Would he grow to resent her, to regret his choice? These fears came to a head one cold December morning when they attended Sunday services in town. The church was full of families, children squirming in pews and babies crying from their mother's arms. Sarah watched Luke's face as he observed a young father bouncing a toddler on his knee, and she thought she saw longing in his expression. On the ride home, she was quiet, and Luke noticed immediately. "What is wrong?" he asked, reaching over to take her gloved hand in his. "Do you regret marrying me?" Sarah blurted out, then immediately wished she could take the words back. Luke pulled the horses to a stop right there in the middle of the road. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Where is this coming from?" "I saw how you looked at that baby in church," Sarah said miserably. "And I thought about how you will never have that, not with me, and I just wondered if maybe you were starting to realize what you gave up." "Sarah, look at me." Luke waited until she met his eyes. "I'm not going to lie and say I never think about having children. I do. But when I think about it, I think about us raising them together whether they come from your body or not. I meant what I said before we married. We can build a family in other ways." "How?" Sarah asked, wanting desperately to believe him but not quite daring to hope. "There is an orphanage in Cheyenne," Luke said slowly. "Run by the Sisters of Mercy. I have donated to them in the past. We could go visit, see if there are any children who might need a home, or we could put out word that we are willing to take in kids who have lost their parents. It happens often enough out here with disease and accidents and Indian troubles. What do you think?" Sarah felt hope kindle in her chest, fragile and tentative. "You would really do that? Take in someone else's children?" "They would not be someone else's children," Luke corrected gently. "They would be our children in every way that matters. Blood is not the only thing that makes a family, Sarah. Love does that." She threw her arms around him right there in the wagon, not caring that they were sitting on a public road, and kissed him with all the love and gratitude in her heart. The following week, they rode into Cheyenne and made their way to the orphanage, a two-story building on the edge of town. Sister Mary Catherine, a formidable woman in her 60s with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," she said, ushering them into a tidy office. "I received your letter. You are interested in providing a home for one of our children, possibly more than one," Luke said, glancing at Sarah for confirmation. She nodded, her heart pounding with nervousness and excitement. Sister Mary Catherine smiled. "We have many children in need of loving homes. Some are quite young, others are older. Some have been here for years, others arrived recently." "What age range were you considering?" Sarah and Luke exchanged a look. They had discussed this at length over the past week, lying in bed and talking late into the night about what they could handle, what would be best. "We are open to older children," Sarah said. "I know most people want babies, but we have room in our hearts and our home for children that others might overlook." Sister Mary Catherine's expression warmed considerably. "Bless you for that," she said. "Older children are often the hardest to place. People worry they are too set in their ways or too damaged by what they have experienced. But every child deserves a chance at family, regardless of age." She led them through the orphanage, showing them the dormitories where rows of narrow beds stood in precise lines, the dining hall where children ate at long wooden tables, the schoolroom where lessons were conducted. Everything was clean and orderly, but there was a sterile quality to it, an absence of warmth that made Sarah's heart ache. The children they passed eyed them with expressions ranging from hope to suspicion to careful blankness. Sarah wanted to gather them all up, take every single one home, but she knew that was not realistic. In the play yard behind the building, Sister Mary Catherine introduced them to several children who were available for adoption. There was 7-year-old Timothy, who had lost his parents to influenza. 9-year-old Martha, whose mother had died in childbirth and whose father had left her at the orphanage, unable to care for her alone. 5-year-old twins, Jacob and Joshua, found wandering on the prairie after their family's wagon burned. Sarah's heart broke for each of them, but it was not until she saw the girl sitting alone under a barren tree that she felt the tug of recognition, the sense of rightness that told her this was meant to be. The girl looked to be about 10 or 11, with honey-colored hair in messy braids and a face that might have been pretty if not for the guarded, almost hostile expression she wore. She sat with a book in her lap, but Sarah noticed she was not actually reading, just using it as a shield against the world. "Who is that?" Sarah asked quietly. Sister Mary Catherine's expression grew somber. "That is Abigail. She is 12 years old, though small for her age. Her parents and younger siblings were killed in an Indian raid 2 years ago. She survived by hiding in a root cellar. She has been here ever since, and I will be honest with you, she has been difficult. She does not speak much, does not play with the other children, and has a tendency to lash out when frightened. Several families have tried to adopt her, but she always does something to make them send her back. I think she believes if she is difficult enough, her real parents will somehow come back for her." Sarah's throat tightened. She knew that kind of pain, that desperate denial of reality. "May I talk to her, of course, but do not expect much response." Sarah walked across the yard, aware of Luke following a few paces behind. She sat down on the ground beside Abigail, not too close, leaving space between them. "Hello," Sarah said. "My name is Sarah. That book you have looks interesting. What is it about?" Abigail did not respond, did not even look at her. "I like to read too," Sarah continued conversationally. "Though I do not get much time for it these days, there is always so much work on the ranch." At the word ranch, Abigail's eyes flickered briefly toward her, then away. "We have horses," Sarah said. "Beautiful horses. My husband Luke, he is amazing with them. He can gentle even the wildest ones. Do you like horses, Abigail?" "My pa had horses," Abigail said suddenly, her voice rusty from disuse. "Before." "Before," Sarah echoed softly, understanding what she meant. "I lost people too. Not the same way you did, but I know what it is like when your whole world changes and you cannot figure out how to keep living in it." Abigail finally looked at her directly, and Sarah saw old pain in those young eyes, pain that no child should have to carry. "They are not coming back," Abigail said flatly. "Everyone says time will make it better, but it does not. It just keeps hurting." "You are right," Sarah said, and saw surprise flicker across Abigail's face. "It does keep hurting. Anyone who says differently is lying or has never really lost anything. But here is what I have learned. The pain does not go away, but you can build new things around it. New people to love, new memories to make. It does not replace what you lost, but it makes life worth living again." "Why are you here?" Abigail asked suspiciously. "Are you going to try to take me home and pretend to be my new ma?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Luke and I came here hoping to find children who might want to be part of our family. I am not trying to replace your mother, Abigail. No one could do that. But I have a home with empty rooms and a heart with room for more love, and I thought maybe there might be a girl who needed those things." Abigail studied her with disconcerting intensity. "You look sad," she finally said. "Even when you smile." Sarah blinked, startled by the girl's perceptiveness. "I suppose I am sometimes. I lost babies I very much wanted. That made me sad for a long time." "That is why you are here," Abigail said with the blunt honesty of children. "You want kids because you cannot have your own." That is part of it, Sarah admitted, but not all of it. I am here because I believe people are meant to help each other, to build families out of love instead of just blood. I am here because I saw you sitting under this tree looking like I have felt so many times, and I thought maybe we could help each other. Abigail was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I am not easy. That is what Sister Mary Catherine tells people. I have nightmares and I break things sometimes, and I do not like to be touched without warning. All right, Sarah said simply. Then we will work around that. Everyone has things that are hard for them. That does not make you broken, Abigail. It makes you human. You really mean that? Abigail asked, and for the first time Sarah heard a thread of hope in her voice. I really do, so what do you say? Would you like to come see the ranch? You can meet the horses, see your room, and decide if you think you might like to stay. And if you decide it is not right for you, we will bring you back, no questions asked. Fair. Abigail looked past Sarah to where Luke stood waiting patiently. Is he nice? She asked quietly. He is the best man I have ever known, Sarah said honestly. He is kind and patient, and he will never hurt you, I promise you that. Abigail closed her book carefully as if making a decision. All right, she said, I will come look, but I am not promising anything. That is perfectly fair, Sarah said, standing and offering her hand to help Abigail up. The girl stood on her own, ignoring the offered hand, but she followed Sarah across the yard to where Luke waited. Hello, Abigail, Luke said, crouching down so he was at her eye level instead of looming over her. I am Luke. I hear you might come visit the ranch. Abigail eyed him warily. Maybe. Well, I hope you do, Luke said easily. We have a new foal that was born last week. She is all legs and curiosity, always getting into trouble. I think she could use a friend. Something shifted in Abigail's expression, a tiny crack in her armor. What color is she? Black with a white star on her forehead, pretty as a picture. If you come, you can help me name her. I have been calling her Troublemaker, but that does not seem quite right for a proper name. Abigail almost smiled. Sarah saw it flicker at the corners of her mouth before she suppressed it. The paperwork to take Abigail for a trial visit took less time than Sarah expected. Sister Mary Catherine was clearly hoping this placement would work out, though she cautioned them to be patient and not to take it personally if Abigail pushed them away at first. She needs to test you, the nun said quietly while Abigail gathered her few belongings. She needs to see if you will abandon her like she believes everyone else has. If you can weather that storm, I think you will find a loyal, loving child underneath all that hurt. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Abigail sat between Sarah and Luke in the wagon, her small body rigid with tension. Sarah did not try to force conversation, just let the girl observe the countryside and adjust to this massive change in her life. When they crested the hill and the ranch came into view, Abigail sat up straighter, her eyes widening slightly. It is big, she said. Big enough for a family, Luke agreed. See that window on the second floor, the one on the left? That would be your room if you decide to stay. Abigail looked at the window for a long moment but said nothing. Pete was waiting in the yard when they arrived, and he greeted Abigail with the same gruff kindness he showed everyone. Pleased to meet you, Miss Abigail. Any friend of Luke and Sarah's is a friend of mine. Abigail gave him a small nod, still guarded but not actively hostile. Sarah showed her through the house, pointing out the kitchen, the parlor, the water closet, and finally leading her upstairs to the room that would be hers. Sarah had spent the past 3 days preparing it, adding a warm quilt to the bed, putting up cheerful yellow curtains, and placing a few books on a shelf. This is all mine, Abigail asked, standing in the doorway as if afraid to enter. All yours, Sarah confirmed. You can arrange it however you like. If you do not like the curtains or the quilt, we can change them. I want you to feel comfortable here. Abigail walked slowly into the room, trailing her fingers over the furniture. She stopped at the window and looked out over the ranch, and Sarah saw her shoulders relax just slightly. Can I really help with the foal? Abigail asked without turning around. Absolutely, Sarah said. In fact, why do not we go see her right now? I bet Luke is already at the barn. They found Luke in the stable, as predicted, with the black foal. The little horse was indeed all legs and energy, prancing around her mother and investigating everything with her soft nose. When Abigail saw her, her whole face transformed. The guarded, hostile expression melted away, replaced by pure wonder. "She is beautiful," she breathed. "Want to meet her?" Luke asked. Abigail nodded eagerly, and Luke showed her how to approach slowly, letting the foal sniff her hand before gently stroking her neck. The foal nickered softly and leaned into the touch, and Abigail made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I think she likes you," Luke said with a smile. "What should we name her?" Abigail asked, looking up at Luke with an expression so hopeful it made Sarah's chest ache. "What do you think would be a good name?" Abigail considered seriously, studying the foal from every angle. "Star," she finally said, "because of the mark on her head, and because stars shine in the darkness." Sarah and Luke exchanged a look over her head, both hearing the deeper meaning in those words. "Star is a perfect name," Luke said quietly. "She is yours, Abigail, your horse to take care of and train as she grows. How does that sound?" Abigail looked at him with wide eyes. "Really?" "She would be mine, really and truly." For the first time since they had met her, Abigail smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. The first weeks with Abigail were challenging. The girl had nightmares most nights, waking screaming from dreams of fire and blood. Sarah would rush to her room and find her huddled in the corner, eyes wild and unseeing. Following Sister Mary Catherine's advice, Sarah learned to speak softly from the doorway until Abigail recognized her, never approaching until the girl indicated it was all right. Some nights, Abigail would let Sarah sit on the bed and hum quietly until she fell back asleep. Other nights, she wanted to be left alone. Sarah learned to read her signals, to respect her boundaries while still making it clear that she was there whenever Abigail needed her. Abigail also had a temper that could flare at unexpected moments. She shattered a plate when Sarah asked her to help with dishes. She kicked over a bucket of milk when Pete teased her gently about something. Each time, she would flee to the barn and hide in Star's stall, and each time, Sarah and Luke would wait patiently for her to emerge, then calmly discuss what had happened without yelling or punishing. "I do not know how to stop," Abigail sobbed one evening after a particularly bad outburst. She and Sarah were sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun set. "I do not want to be angry all the time, but it is like there is this thing inside me that just explodes." "That is grief," Sarah said gently, "and fear and pain all mixed together. It has to come out somehow, and anger is easier than sadness sometimes." "Aaron, not you going to send me back?" Abigail asked, her voice small and scared. "That is what always happens. I mess up too many times and people decide I am not worth the trouble." Sarah turned to face her fully. "Abigail, look at me. We are not sending you back. You are not too much trouble. You are a girl who has been through something terrible and you are doing the best you can. That is all anyone can ask. Luke and I are in this for the long haul. You are our daughter now if you will have us as your parents." Abigail stared at her, tears streaming down her face. "I do not want to forget them," she whispered. "My real ma and pa, if I let myself love you, does that mean I did not love them enough?" "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah said, her own eyes filling with tears. "You can love us both. Your heart is big enough for that. Loving us does not mean forgetting them or loving them less. They will always be your parents, your first family. But we can be your family too, a different kind of family, but just as real." Abigail launched herself into Sarah's arms then, sobbing into her shoulder, and Sarah held her tightly, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words. It was the first time Abigail had initiated physical contact, and Sarah felt the significance of it down to her bones. When Luke came around the corner and saw them, he quickly assessed the situation and sat down on Abigail's other side, adding his solid presence without crowding her. After a while, Abigail reached out and took his hand, and the three of them sat together as the stars came out. From that night on, things slowly improved. Abigail still had nightmares, but they grew less frequent. Her temper still flared, but she learned to recognize the warning signs and remove herself before exploding. She began to laugh more, the sound ringing through the house like music. She threw herself into caring for Star, spending hours at the barn grooming the foal, talking to her, teaching her to lead. Luke worked with them both, showing Abigail how to train a horse with patience and kindness rather than force. Sarah taught her to bake bread, to sew, to tend the winter garden they had in the root cellar. Abigail was a quick learner when she felt safe, and she soaked up the attention and praise like a flower starved for water. By Christmas, 3 months after she had come to live with them, Abigail was calling them Ma and Pa without prompting. The first time she said it, Sarah had to leave the room to compose herself, overwhelmed by joy. Christmas morning, they gave Abigail a new saddle, child-sized and perfect for her to use as she learned to ride Star. Abigail's gift to them was a drawing she had done in secret, showing the 3 of them standing together with the ranch and mountains in the background. Sarah framed it and hung it in the parlor where everyone could see it. As winter deepened, and the new year of 1883 arrived, Sarah found herself happier than she had ever thought possible. Her marriage to Luke grew stronger every day, their love deepening from the initial passion into something more solid and enduring. And Abigail, difficult, damaged, wonderful Abigail, was healing before their eyes, becoming the child she was meant to be before tragedy stole her family. One evening in late January, as they sat around the fire after dinner, Abigail looked up from the book she was reading and said, "Can we get more?" Sarah blinked. "More what, sweetheart? More kids, more brothers and sisters for me. There are so many at the orphanage who need families, and we have room here." Sarah and Luke looked at each other, surprised but touched by Abigail's suggestion. "You would want that?" Luke asked. "To share us with other children?" Abigail nodded seriously. "I know what it feels like to be there, to think nobody wants you, and I know how good it feels to have a family again. We should share that. Besides," she added with a mischievous grin, "it would be nice to have someone else to do chores with." Sarah laughed and pulled Abigail into a hug. "You have a very generous heart," she said. "What do you think, Luke? Should we consider it?" "I think we should go back to the orphanage and see who is there," Luke said thoughtfully. "But Abigail, you need to understand that it might be hard sometimes. New children might not adjust as well as you have. There might be jealousy or fighting. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," Abigail said without hesitation, "because we will help them just like you helped me." Right, Sarah agreed, her heart full to bursting. The following week, they made the journey to Cheyenne. Sister Mary Catherine was delighted to see them, especially when she saw how well Abigail looked, how confident and happy she had become. "You have worked miracles with her," the nun said quietly to Sarah while Luke and Abigail went to look at the horses in the orphanage's small stable. "She worked miracles with us too," Sarah replied honestly. "She taught us that we could do this, that we could be parents. Now we want to do it again." They met several children that day. There was Thomas, a serious 8-year-old whose father had died in a mining accident and whose mother had succumbed to pneumonia shortly after. There was 6-year-old Lily, a tiny girl with curly red hair who had been found abandoned at a church. And there were the twins Abigail had mentioned, Jacob and Joshua, now 6 years old and inseparable. "We want them all," Luke said that evening as they discussed it on the ride home. "If you are willing, Sarah, Thomas, Lily, and the twins, can we do that? 4 more children all at once." "It will be chaos," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "The house will be full of noise and mess and probably fighting, but yes, I think we can do it. I think we are meant to do it." Abigail, who had been listening from the back of the wagon, let out a whoop of joy. "I am going to have brothers and sisters," she crowed. The process of adopting 4 children at once was more complicated than it had been with just Abigail, but Sister Mary Catherine expedited things as much as possible. By the end of February, Thomas, Lily, Jacob, and Joshua had all come home to the Morgan Ranch. The adjustment period was every bit as chaotic as Sarah had predicted. The The twins were wild, used to fending for themselves, and they stole food constantly, hoarding it in their room as if afraid it might disappear. Thomas was withdrawn and grieving, barely speaking for the first 2 weeks. Lily cried for her mother, a woman she could not even remember and had trouble sleeping alone, but slowly, with patience and love, the children began to settle. Abigail was a tremendous help, taking her role as oldest sibling seriously. She helped Lily at night when nightmares came, played with the twins until they learned to trust that there would always be enough food, and sat quietly with Thomas until he was ready to talk about his pain. Sarah and Luke were exhausted but had never been happier. The house that had once been so empty now rang with the sounds of children playing, arguing, laughing, and living. Meals were boisterous affairs with everyone talking at once. Bedtime involved reading stories to multiple children in multiple rooms. The laundry pile never seemed to end. But when Sarah looked at her family, her incredible, impossible family, she felt nothing but gratitude. This was what Luke had promised her that snowy night when she had confessed her barrenness, a home filled with love. He had kept that promise in ways she never could have imagined. Spring came to Wyoming in a rush of green and color. The children helped plant a huge garden, getting dirt under their fingernails and sunburned noses. They watched as Star grew bigger and stronger, and Luke began teaching the older ones to ride on the gentler horses. One particularly beautiful day in April, Sarah stood on the porch watching her family. Luke was in the corral with Thomas and Abigail, showing them how to handle a rope. The twins were racing around the yard playing some elaborate game that involved a lot of shrieking. Lily sat in the grass making daisy chains, her red curls brilliant in the sunlight. Pete came to stand beside Sarah, following her gaze. "You have done something special here," he said in his gruff way. "These kids, they are thriving, and Luke, I have never seen him so content." "You brought life to this place, Sarah." "We brought life to each other," Sarah said softly. "Luke saved me in more ways than he knows, and these children, they saved me too. They gave me purpose, gave me the family I thought I could never have." "That cowboy of yours knew what he was talking about when he said you would fill your home with love," Pete observed. "This place is about bursting with it." Sarah smiled, remembering that conversation with Luke, the promise he had made that they would find a way. He had been right. They had built something beautiful together, something that transcended biology and blood. That night, after the children were finally settled in bed and the house was quiet, Sarah and Luke sat together on the porch swing watching the stars. "Are you happy?" Luke asked, his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah said honestly. "Are you? This is not exactly what most men dream of when they think about marriage and family." Luke turned to look at her, and even in the darkness she could see the love in his eyes. "This is exactly what I dream about," he said. "You, those kids, this life we have built together. I would not change a single thing, Sarah. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into that kiss, and when they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing past what I thought were my flaws, for loving me anyway, for keeping your promise." "Sarah," Luke said, tipping her chin up so she had to look at him. "You never had flaws, you just had challenges, and I did not love you anyway. I loved you because of who you are, every part of you. That has not changed and it never will." They sat together in the soft darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The years that followed were full and rich. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Abigail remained the leader, but in a gentle way, always looking out for her younger siblings. Thomas came out of his shell and revealed a dry wit and a talent for working with wood. Lily was pure sunshine, brightening every room she entered. The twins remained inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into good-natured trouble. In 1884, they added 2 more children to their family. Maria, a 9-year-old girl whose parents had died of typhoid, and Samuel, a 10-year-old boy who had been living on the streets of Cheyenne. Both came with their own traumas and challenges, but by now, Sarah and Luke had learned how to help children heal. They provided structure, love, consistency, and patience, and eventually, both Maria and Samuel began to thrive. The ranch prospered as well. Luke's reputation for raising quality horses spread, and buyers came from as far away as Texas to purchase from him. They added more land, more cattle, more horses. Pete, who showed no signs of slowing down despite his advancing years, hired on additional hands to help with the increased work. Sarah became known throughout the county as the woman who took in orphans, and people began bringing her children who needed homes. Not all stayed permanently. Some she cared for temporarily until relatives could be found or other arrangements made, but many became permanent members of the Morgan family. By 1886, there were 12 children living at the ranch full-time, ranging in age from 4 to 16. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate everyone. Meals required 3 chickens or a whole side of beef. The noise level was somewhere between raucous and deafening, and Sarah loved every chaotic, exhausting, wonderful moment of it. Abigail, now 16 years old, had grown into a beautiful young woman with her mother's strength and her own unique grace. She was an accomplished rider, often helping Luke with the horses, and had a way with the younger children that made her invaluable. One evening in late summer, Abigail came to Sarah with a nervous expression on her face. They were in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the horde, and Abigail had been unusually quiet. "Ma," she said finally, "can I talk to you about something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" Abigail twisted her apron in her hands. "There is a boy. His name is Daniel Cooper. His family has the ranch about 10 miles north. He has been coming around asking if he can call on me. Pa said I should talk to you about it." Sarah set down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables and gave Abigail her full attention. "What do you think about him?" "I like him," Abigail admitted, blushing. "He is kind and respectful. He makes me laugh. But Ma, I am scared too. What if I am like my birth parents were? What if something terrible happens? I do not know if I could survive losing another family." Sarah's heart ached for her daughter, understanding the fear that drove those words. She pulled Abigail into a hug, holding her close. "I understand that fear," she said softly. "After I lost your pa's and my babies, after I lost Thomas, I was so afraid to love again. I thought if I did not let myself care, I could not get hurt. But Luke showed me that living in fear is not really living at all. Love is always a risk, but it is a risk worth taking. But what if something happens to him, or to you and Pa? I could not bear it. Abigail, we cannot live our lives preparing for tragedy. Yes, terrible things happen. You and I both know that better than most. But beautiful things happen too. You have to let yourself experience the beautiful even though you know the terrible is possible. Does that make sense?" Abigail nodded slowly. "I think so. So you think I should let Daniel call on me?" "I think you should follow your heart," Sarah said. "But take it slow, get to know him. Make sure he is worthy of you because you are pretty remarkable." Abigail hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Ma, for everything. I do not think I have ever told you how grateful I am that you came to the orphanage that day. You and Pa saved my life." "You saved ours too," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "More than you will ever know." The harvest season of 1886 was particularly good, and Luke decided to throw a celebration for the whole family and their neighbors. They roasted whole pigs, set up tables in the yard, and invited everyone within 20 miles. Sarah spent days preparing with help from Abigail, Maria, and even the younger girls. They baked pies, made gallons of lemonade, and cooked enough food to feed an army. The older boys helped Luke and Pete set up the tables and a makeshift dance floor. The day of the celebration was perfect, warm and sunny with a slight breeze that kept it comfortable. People began arriving in the late afternoon, bringing dishes to share and instruments for music. Soon the yard was full of friends and neighbors, all eating, talking, and laughing. As evening fell, someone brought out a fiddle and the dancing began. Sarah watched Luke twirl Lily around the dance floor, the little girl shrieking with delight. She saw Thomas talking seriously with some of the older men about cattle prices. She saw the twins racing around with other children their age. She saw Abigail dancing with young Daniel Cooper, and yes, the way they looked at each other suggested this might be serious. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Morgan?" a voice said beside her, and she turned to find Luke offering his hand. "The hostess should not abandon her guests," Sarah protested laughingly. "The hostess has been working non-stop for 3 days. She deserves a dance with her husband." Luke pulled her onto the dance floor before she could protest further. They moved together easily, years of partnership making them naturally in sync. Sarah rested her head on Luke's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt overwhelmingly grateful for this life, this man, this family. "Do you remember what you told me that night in my little house during the blizzard?" Sarah asked. "When I said I could not marry you because I was barren." "I said we would fill our home with love," Luke replied, his arms tightening around her. "And I think we did a pretty good job of that, do not you?" Sarah looked around at their vast, loud, chaotic, perfect family. Children were everywhere, laughing and playing and simply being alive. The house in the background glowed with warm light from every window. Friends and neighbors filled the yard, all part of the larger community they had built. "More than good," Sarah said. "We did something miraculous." "We did it together," Luke corrected. "You and me, partner." "Partners?" Sarah agreed, and kissed him there in the middle of the dance floor, not caring who saw. The years continued to pass in a blur of growth and change. The children grew up one by one and began to make their own ways in the world. But they always came home, bringing spouses and eventually grandchildren of their own. The ranch house that Sarah had once thought too large for just her and Luke became too small for family gatherings, so they added on again, building a huge dining room that could seat 30 people comfortably. Abigail married Daniel Cooper in 1888, and Sarah cried through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed by joy and pride for the remarkable woman her first daughter had become. They settled on the Cooper Ranch and within 2 years presented Sarah and Luke with their first grandchild, a boy they named Luke Thomas. The other children followed suit over the years, some marrying, some pursuing other interests. Thomas became a skilled carpenter and furniture maker. Maria became a teacher. Samuel took over much of the daily operation of the ranch as Luke's responsibilities grew. The twins, inevitably, went into business together running a freight company. Through it all, Sarah and Luke remained the center, the heart of this ever-expanding family. They grew older together, Luke's hair turning silver at the temples, Sarah's dark hair streaking with gray. But the love between them never diminished, never faded into comfortable companionship. They still looked at each other across crowded rooms and felt their hearts skip. They still danced together on the porch on warm summer nights. They still held hands and talked for hours about everything and nothing. In 1895, now in their mid-50s, Sarah and Luke took stock of what they had built together. 13 children raised to adulthood, all thriving and happy. 23 grandchildren and counting. A ranch that employed over 30 people, a legacy of love that would ripple forward through generations. One crisp autumn evening, very similar to that day over a decade ago when Sarah had first come looking for work, they sat together on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked, a question she had asked before over the years but never tired of hearing the answer to. "Not a single one," Luke said firmly. Only that I wasted so much time thinking I was not worthy of love because I could not bear children," Sarah said. "But even that regret is tempered by knowing that if things had been different, we might not have found each other. We might not have built this family, so perhaps everything happened exactly as it was meant to." "I believe that," Luke said. "I believe we were meant to find each other. I believe those children were meant to be ours. I believe this was always the life we were supposed to have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Luke said, "Did I ever tell you that you are the bravest person I have ever known?" Sarah laughed. "Me, brave. I spent most of my life terrified." "Exactly," Luke said. "Being brave does not mean you are not afraid, it means you do things despite the fear. You were afraid to love again, but you did it anyway. You were afraid you would fail those children, but you opened your home to them anyway. You were afraid your past had broken you beyond repair, but you let me love you anyway. That is the very definition of courage, Sarah." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks, the good kind of tears that came from being truly seen and understood. "I could not have done any of it without you," she said. "You are the one who showed me that different does not mean less. That a family built on love is just as real as one built on blood. That my worth was not defined by my ability to give birth. You gave me back myself, Luke. You did the same for me," Luke said softly. "I was so lonely before you, Sarah. I did not even realize how lonely until you filled my life with laughter and purpose and love. You made me whole." They kissed then, a sweet, tender kiss that held 13 years of love and partnership. And Sarah thought that this, right here, was what happily ever after really looked like. Not a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect, but a real, hard-won, beautiful life built by two people who refused to give up on each other or on love itself. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard drifted up to the porch. Someone was playing the piano inside, probably Maria teaching one of the younger children. The smell of fresh bread came from the kitchen where several of their daughters-in-law were preparing tomorrow's meals. "We should go in," Sarah said without moving. "Everyone will wonder where we are." "Let them wonder," Luke said, pulling her closer. "I want a few more minutes with just you, remembering how this all started." "How did it start?" Sarah asked, smiling because she knew the answer but loved hearing him tell it. "It started with a woman who was far too brave for her own good, looking for work at a stockyard," Luke said. "A woman with sad eyes and a determined chin who looked at me like I might be the answer to a prayer she did not dare to pray. And in that moment, I knew my life was about to change." "And did it change?" "Completely," Luke said. "Irrevocably, for the better in every possible way. You were the answer to my prayer too, Sarah. The prayer I did not know I was praying for a partner, a love, a person to build something beautiful with. You were all of that and more." Sarah nestled into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished and deeply, profoundly happy. The little girl inside her who had lost her parents on the trail, the young woman who had buried babies and a husband, the widow who had thought her life was over, they were all still part of her. But they had been joined by the wife, the mother, the grandmother she had become, and the sum of all those parts was a woman who had learned that love was not about perfection or even biology. Love was about showing up, day after day, and choosing each other. Love was about opening your heart even when it had been broken. Love was about filling the empty spaces with people who needed you as much as you needed them. "I love you, Luke Morgan," Sarah said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too, Sarah Morgan," Luke replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." Inside the house, a child called for Grandma and another called for Grandpa, and real life intruded on their peaceful moment. But as they stood to answer those calls, hand in hand, they carried with them the knowledge that they had built something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy not of blood and genetics, but of love and choice and the simple, profound decision to fill a home with as much love as it could hold. Years later, when Sarah was an old woman with silver hair and Luke was bent with age but still strong in spirit, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would gather at the ranch for holidays and celebrations. And someone would always ask them to tell the story of how they met, how they built their remarkable family. Sarah would take Luke's hand, still fitting perfectly into hers after all these years, and she would begin. "It started when I told him I could not marry him because I was barren." And Luke would continue, his voice still warming her soul. and I told her that we would fill our home with love instead. And their audience would smile because they were the living proof of that promise kept. They were the love that filled that home, spilling over into the world, creating ripples that would continue long after Sarah and Luke returned to the earth that had given them so much. But that was still years in the future. On this particular autumn evening, Sarah and Luke were still young enough to dance, to love, to build. They went inside together to their waiting family, to the life they had created through determination and hope and unwavering love for each other. And as the door closed behind them, the house seemed to glow even brighter, as if the love contained within its walls was too powerful to be contained, spilling out into the Wyoming night like a beacon for all who might need to find their way home. And they all lived, truly and deeply, happily ever after.